in this stage of my life, I always wanted to bring together people who had accurate knowledge of what would take place in a neighborhood. I am so pleased that you have chosen to come out this afternoon to participate in what we visualize as the beginning of the accurate history of U Street and the surrounding community of what we now call Children.
What we're doing today is part of a planning process. We're very grateful for funding from the Humanities Council of Washington, D.C. and the Dorothea DeSchweinitz Fund of the National Trust for Historic Preservation, which has awarded money to the center to begin to think about what ought to be in a history center. I think by that we mean exhibits, and we mean some programs, and perhaps things that are just not in that building that would allow us to collaborate with all the other historic sites like the White Law, the Lincoln Theater, in interpreting the powerful history of this place. So, Maria.
As Kathy said, my name is Maria, and what I do when I'm not working on this project is that I'm a graduate student, and I'm doing my dissertation on leisure and recreation among blacks in D.C. between 1930 and 1960. And so part of why I'm involved in this project is because it particularly relates to my work as a graduate student. But essentially what I'm doing in relation to this project is doing an inventory of the resources on Shaw. And so I've been going to the Morton Singer Research Center at Howard University, the Library of Congress, National Archives, the Martin Luther King Public Library, Washingtoniana Division. I've also been interviewing and talking with people who have either lived or worked in the Shaw area who have wonderful artifacts in their houses, in their apartments, etc. So I also invite any of you who may have materials of your own that you might want to share, at least let us know about, that we can either put in the guide or just keep in our mind that you all have these materials that you might be willing to share.
The piece that we're doing today is to hear from all of you. We're here to learn from you. If there's going to be a museum, and there is in this place, what should it say? What's the story? And Maria and I feel that the story doesn't come from historians. It comes from the people who lived it and who know it and who are living it now. So this is a process that involves us learning from you. It's very open-ended. We'd love to have you bounce ideas off of one another as they come up. Things may remind you of, somebody will say something and remind you of something. One caution is that we can't get it all today. And I know, for example, we have Mr. Saunders sitting here who we need to sit down with the tape recorder for many hours. So, and others of you here in this room have memories too that I hope we can come back at a later time and get more of them and get the facts that you all know. But today what we'd like to do is draw the outlines of the picture. There's a picture here. And if we can draw the outlines today, then we can fill in the details. So the point is, if you walked into a museum that was about the place that you know and love, what would you want to see there? If somebody came here from out of town on a bus and came into an exhibit at the old library, what would you want them to learn? Looking
About
at
the
the
places
walls,
and the people.
about all this. What does this mean? What is so important to hear about all this?
From my experience, it was more a matter of in Washington, D.C. in earlier times, during some of the segregation or Jim Crow, these were just the places to be for black people. Not only were they the places to be, it was black society, it was black businesses, it was the only place that you were allowed to be. Okay? And to put all of these kinds of things into that kind of context, it means a lot because that's all we had. And not only was that all we had, we were kind of proud of it and tried to make it as good as it could possibly be.
I guess you could call it the social and economic focal point of the community.
Yeah. You use the word community. What is that? What, I don't mean to put you on the spot, but what does that mean to you?
Well, to me, it would mean that it would be an aggregation of people from various social and economic status coming together with a common focus shopping, entertainment, amusement, and just generally family upbringing.
People came to shore from every other part of Washington, no matter where they lived. This was the place that we all came to go to the Howell Theater, to go to Cecilia's, to go to Sportsman Lounge. We came to all, right, all of the entertainment basically was located in this area.
Judge Marshall began his career that we all know about under the aegis of Houston, Hasty and Houston, a law firm that was located on 11th Street, just off the corner of Houston. And it was Charles Houston in particular who encouraged, if not directed, Mr. Marshall to do the work that he later became so famous.
To this city, to this community, to recognize or to know about these places, one of which is in a historical suite because African Americans were freed in Washington before the Emancipation Proclamation. And because of the migration of African Americans from the South, that Washington represented one of the first places where people moving or relocating from the South would come to Washington, and much is made of the Apollo Theater, and all the Howard Theater is even older than the Apollo. And these were the first places where some of the people that went on to national prominence in other more northern cities and to the west, they got their sort of start in Washington and some of the places that have and will be named by many of the people in this room. And it is important that people understand the things that they cherish about their own cities and the like may in fact have their roots right along the U Street corridor in terms of where people could come, where they opened up their professional practices, where they got their entertainment training, where they became entrepreneurs, how their fraternal and Masonic organizations, where they located and what they did along these corridors and the like. So there's so much of the history of the rest of America that in fact runs along the tree of history. The roots run into the Shaw community and into the U Street corridor.
I ask that because I find that there are a lot of people moving out of this community, and people who are moving in are not taking interest in the community at all, and that's why you have a lot of areas that have drugs and have high crime rate. So my question is, I guess what I'm trying to get at is, if you're building something that is supposed to be, to preserve the history of this area, who is going to take interest in it, and how are the people in this community going to preserve that interest so that the youth that are coming up are going to take pride and then want to stay in this community and want to keep building it up and get it back to the way it used to be with these, elaborate businesses, these entertainments of all these great people such as Duke Ellington, and bring those people back to this community.
This area is a lot more important to me than Harlem. We had a lot more than Harlem. We had black professionals, lawyers. The True Reformer Building is a good example of what the African American community was about at that time. We had black financiers, doctors, architects, lawyers. They built that building. Now, as we as a black community, are we coming together to make sure that it is still in our hands? Have we talked about that? But that's out there in the public.
If I wanted to, if you ask me what I like to see on the board, I'd like to see the fact that this was a mecca and a hub for black intelligentsia, that a number of different poets, artists, great thinkers, W. Du Bois, had societies, and they were elitists, and they had their own, small special groups, but they were, some of the best thinkers in the world.
You have something that you want to present to people to show the history of the area, right? Am I right?
Right.
All I'm saying is, where does that stop? Is you gonna stop just at Thurgood Marshall, or you gonna keep going on from generation to generation to generation? And then when you get to that next generation, what history are they gonna have in this area if the people in the community are new and are not taking it on?
Oh, yeah.
Can I just,
Maria,
I'm gonna let Mr. Bailey, but I think I want to interject something really quickly. I guess part of it is that we, thinking like from the 20s to 50s and having this sense that it was predominantly black and it was active and there was professionals and there were a lot of different classes moving together. And so in us trying to preserve that history in the Thurgood Marshall Center, is it that we want to preserve that history, and is it also that we want to replicate that history? I mean, do we have a sense that if Shaw no longer continues to be predominantly black, then it's no longer the Shaw that we want, or is it possible that there's a new Shaw, that there's a changing Shaw? That may,
The history should be on the long-term continuum. In other words, it should be perpetual. Yes,
should it be the same though? I mean, that's the question. I mean, if the Shaw is no longer the Shaw,
it will always be Shaw. But the point is that there are various, how can I say, events in the history of Shaw. So if you want to go from the 20s to the 50s, that's fine. But then you can go from the 50s to the 70s. Then you can go from the 70s to the 90s. You can go on infinitum. The point is that it will always be Shaw. Everything changes. It's the same thing down right at 13th and Pennsylvania Avenue. In the drugstore, they show Washington, a progression, right on through. That's not going to stop. They're going to continue to show Washington as time continues. You do the same thing, you just don't end it. In the 50s, you continue, and you keep marching it right along.
Not only are we concerned with the intelligentsia, but let's face it, much of the history that I've been collecting was about the churches. All the churches were very active educational centers, all were out there. The barber shops.
Yes.
That's where these things were discussed. The beauty salons, the gasoline stations, all of these things. Many of the greatest people that have contributed most in this city were, say, undertakers.
Yes.
Well, many of these people, and they were also educators. Now, the schools themselves did as best that they really could, but the schools are not the only educators. You know, we talk about the YMCA. That was a beautiful educator. It was an educator for me. You know, it was an educator for many of the youngsters in our time. And I think what you're trying to say is how is it going to go? It's going to go on regardless of whether we put up a building.
I understand.
It's going to continue the education. What many, I notice, African and Indian tribes and whatnot, they gather the youth around the campsite and they explain who their ancestors were and what happened in the past and why this is important to carry this on and so forth and so on. And these youngsters did the very same thing when they got to the position that they were training their children.
Say that we have, in fact, voted with our feet in terms of the African American community on a number of occasions. We did not all settle in the areas of the South where our ancestors were imported to and where we began a history. We migrated to other locations. Right now, we have migrated in large part from communities such as Shaw to Prince George's County and all, and have begun another history in the community of Prince George's County. But I don't really take issue with someone else who takes an asset that they may have inherited and decided to sell it because they want the resources to take to wherever they now call home. I can't take issue with that, although I understand that, and I would hope that more people would think in terms of being another generation in this community, as I live across the street from my parents' house. And so we have now two generations and a third represented in my children, all located on the same street. So that's a kind of thing, but I also understand that unless we intervene in the lives of a lot of other children and all who are growing up in this community, they're going to out-migrate from this community and not be the kinds of resources to represent customer bases and to pass the history